Most people will waste the next 72 hours without realizing they just made a decision. The next 3 days decide more than people are willing to admit. Not in an obvious way, not in a way you can point to immediately, but in the kind of way that only becomes clear after it's already done. Most people will move through these days on autopilot, without questioning, and because nothing forces them to stop, they won't. They'll assume everything is staying the same, when in reality, something is quietly locking into place. But a small number of people, spiritually attuned people, will be aware of what's happening right now. They will feel it. And once you see what's actually happening right now, you won't be able to unsee it. Right now, everything is starting to move forward whether you're ready or not. Mid-April isn't just another point in the year, it's where things stop building quietly and start pushing outward. What was slow, uncertain, or paused over the past months begins to pick up speed, and not in a way you can fully control. During the colder months, it's easy to stay still, to think, to wait, to delay decisions because nothing is really demanding movement. But this point changes that. Things that were sitting in the background start coming forward, opportunities, conversations, even thoughts you kept putting off. When people talk about a 72-hour window, they imagine something external opening up, like reality itself is bending for a short period of time. But what's actually happening is far more subtle and, in a way, more powerful. It's not that the world becomes fluid, it's that your direction becomes easier to shift than usual. Mid-April sits in a very specific position in the year. It's far enough away from the beginning where intentions start fading, but early enough that nothing is fully locked in yet. You're no longer in that reflective, slow phase where everything feels like it can wait, and you're not yet in the momentum of summer where things are already in motion. You're in between, and that in between is where changes happen quickly, almost quietly. On top of that, there's a natural pattern most people go through without realizing it. First comes awareness, where something starts to feel different or slightly off. Then comes processing, where you think about it, question it, maybe even ignore it for a bit, and then comes action, or the lack of it. That entire cycle doesn't take months. It often happens in short bursts, and more often than not, within a few days. That's where the idea of a 72-hour window comes from. Not a literal portal, not something mystical opening in the sky, but a period where that cycle completes itself faster than usual, where what you've been thinking about finally reaches a point where something either moves forward or quietly gets left behind. Change doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It locks in during the moment you treat as unimportant. Most people think that major life shifts come with intensity. They expect something emotional, something overwhelming, something that feels undeniable in the moment. But if you actually look back at the moments that changed things for you, they rarely felt like that while they were happening. They felt normal. They felt like any other day where you could have gone either way, and it wouldn't have seemed like a big deal. That's where the real decisions happen, not in chaos, but in calm. Not when you're forced to act, but when you could act and decide not to. That's why quiet days carry so much weight. There's no pressure guiding you, no urgency pushing you in a certain direction. It's just you, your thoughts, and a small window where something can shift if you let it. And because it feels so neutral, most people assume it doesn't matter. The moments that feel optional are the ones that define you the most. April 12th sits right in that category. There's nothing about it that demands your attention. No external signal telling you this is important. No reason to treat it differently from any other day. And that's exactly why it works the way it does. Because when nothing is forcing you to move, what you choose to do becomes far more honest. You're not reacting, you're revealing where you actually stand. And those quiet decisions, the ones that don't feel dramatic or life-changing in the moment, tend to echo much louder later on. By the time it feels like it mattered, you've already moved past the point where you could have changed it. There's a reason the number 12 keeps appearing in cycles across different areas of life, and it's not just coincidence. 12 represents completion. It's the point where something has gone through its full process and reaches a natural end before anything new can begin. You see it in time, in structure, in patterns. It marks the closing of a loop, and that's what makes April 12th carry a different kind of weight. It's not about starting something fresh, it's about what's already been building finally reaching a point where it can't stay open anymore. Something has to be closed, decided, or acknowledged before you can move forward properly. People are drawn to the idea of new beginnings because it feels exciting. It feels like a clean slate where you can leave everything behind and start over. But what most people don't realize is that nothing truly starts clean if something from before is still unresolved. It doesn't disappear, it just follows you, shows up again, and demands attention later, often in a stronger way. That's why this moment isn't asking you to begin, it's asking you to finish. New chapters don't start when you turn the page, they start when you finally close the last one. And the things that need to be closed aren't always obvious or dramatic. Sometimes it's a decision you've been delaying, something you've been going back and forth on without committing. Sometimes it's a situation you've been tolerating, even though you already know it's not aligned with where you want to go. It could even be a mindset you've outgrown, but haven't fully let go of yet. Whatever it is, it's not new. It's something that's been with you for a while, something that's been sitting in the background, waiting for a moment where you're clear enough to finally deal with it. And this is that kind of moment. Because if it's not closed here, it doesn't just pause, it continues. It carries forward into the next phase, influencing decisions, shaping outcomes, and keeping you tied to something that should have been resolved already. Unfinished things don't fade, they repeat until you face them. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Resistance is the final defense before breakthrough. Right before things shift, it often feels the hardest. More doubt, more pressure, more reasons to stop. And it can feel like a sign that something's wrong, but sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes that resistance shows up because you're close to change, close to something new, close to moving past a version of yourself that's been comfortable for too long. And that's where most people turn back. Thank you for sharing this. This 72-hour window doesn't happen all at once. It moves in a sequence, and once you recognize the pattern, it becomes easier to understand why it feels the way it does. It starts with April 11th, the signal. This is the quiet beginning. Nothing overwhelming, nothing that demands your attention, just a subtle shift in awareness. You might notice certain thoughts coming up more often, or something that usually stays in the background becoming slightly harder to ignore. It's not pushing you yet, it's just bringing something into view. And because it's so subtle, this is where most people overlook it. They brush it off, distract themselves, or assume it's nothing important. But that's where the process begins. Then comes April 12th, the pressure. This is where things start becoming clearer. What felt like a passing thought begins to feel more defined. You start seeing connections, understanding things a bit more deeply, and the space to ignore it starts shrinking. It's not chaotic or overwhelming, but there's a noticeable shift in how present that situation or decision feels. You can still avoid it, but it takes more effort. Pressure doesn't force change. It exposes what you've been avoiding. This is where awareness turns into something harder to ignore. You start recognizing what actually needs your attention, even if you haven't acted on it yet. It becomes more real, more present, and more difficult to push aside without noticing that you're doing it. And then comes April 13th, the click. This is the point where something settles internally. It doesn't always look dramatic from the outside, but inside, there's a shift. A realization becomes clear. A decision that felt uncertain starts making sense. Something that was confusing suddenly feels simple, not easy, but clear. Clarity feels quiet, but once it arrives, it doesn't leave. And when that clarity hits, you can't really go back to not seeing it. You might still delay action, you might still hesitate, but the uncertainty that was there before is gone. You know what's in front of you, and you know what needs to be done. That's the full cycle. It starts with a signal, builds into pressure, and ends with clarity. And what you do at each stage shapes how that final moment feels, whether it feels like relief, like direction, or like a missed opportunity that you recognize just a little too late. This is where most people lose the entire opportunity, not because they don't understand it, but because they try to do too much with it. They think this kind of moment means they need to fix everything at once. They start thinking about every area of their life, every decision, every problem, and within minutes, it becomes overwhelming. And when it becomes overwhelming, they do what people always do. They step back, delay, and tell themselves they'll deal with it later when they have more clarity. That's exactly what you don't want to do here. This isn't about everything. It's about one thing, one situation that keeps coming back into your awareness, one decision you've been circling around without committing to, one pattern you already recognize isn't working, but you've been tolerating because it's familiar, because it's easier than changing it. That's where your focus needs to go. Because during these 72 hours, your energy is more effective when it's concentrated. When you spread it across too many things, nothing moves. You think, you analyze, you go back and forth, but at the end of it, you're still standing in the same place, just more mentally exhausted than before. Clarity doesn't come from thinking about everything. It comes from facing one thing completely. Most people are waiting for a feeling that never fully arrives. They want to feel ready, certain, completely sure before they take any kind of step. They think clarity is something that shows up first and then action follows. But in reality, it's often the opposite. Clarity comes after you move, not before. And this is where you gain an advantage without needing anything special, without needing more knowledge or more time than anyone else. Because while most people are still thinking, still hesitating, still trying to figure everything out in their head, you're willing to take a step forward even if it's not perfect. That alone changes everything. People don't stay stuck because they lack answers. They stay stuck because they wait for certainty. During these 72 hours, the gap between thinking and acting becomes more noticeable. You'll see it in yourself. Part of you will want to move, and another part will tell you to wait just a little longer, to think a little more, to make sure it's the right move. And if you listen to that second voice every time, nothing shifts. But if you move slightly before everything makes sense, even in a small way, you create momentum. And once momentum starts, things begin to open up naturally. You start seeing options you didn't notice before. You start understanding things that weren't clear when you were just thinking about them. Action reveals what thinking hides. That's the advantage. You're not trying to have everything figured out. You're not trying to make the perfect decision. You're just not staying still when you already know something needs to change. And that willingness to move, even slightly, puts you ahead of most people who are still waiting for a perfect moment that never fully arrives. Because by the time things feel completely clear, the moment that would have made it easier has already passed, and what could have been a simple shift becomes something that takes much longer to correct. Most people won't miss this because they weren't capable of seeing it. They'll miss it because they moved past it too quickly. Something shifts, even slightly, and instead of staying with it, they explain it away. They call it stress, mood, overthinking, a random feeling that doesn't mean anything. And the moment they give it that label, they've already created distance from it. It goes from something worth paying attention to something they can safely ignore. That's how the opportunity disappears. Because what shows up during moments like this isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't force itself into your life. It shows up quietly in the form of a thought that won't fully go away, a realization that keeps coming back, or a sense that something isn't sitting right anymore. And instead of leaning into it, most people immediately reach for distraction. They scroll, they fill their time. They keep themselves busy enough to not have to sit with it. Distraction isn't harmless. It's how people delay the moment that would have changed everything. And the dangerous part is, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels normal. It feels like staying productive, staying entertained, staying occupied. But underneath that, something unresolved is still there, waiting for attention that never fully comes. So the cycle repeats. The same thoughts show up weeks later. The same decisions get delayed again. The same patterns continue, not because they're permanent, but because they're never fully faced when the moment presents itself. What makes these 72 hours different is that what's been building quietly in the background tends to surface just enough for you to notice it clearly. Not completely, not in a way that solves everything, but in a way that gives you a real chance to engage with it. And most people will let that chance pass, not because they don't want change, but because they didn't recognize the moment where change actually begins. At some point, you have to strip this down to what's actually real. April 12th doesn't hold any power on its own. It's not the date that changes anything. It's not the idea of a 72-hour window that suddenly alters your life. Those things don't create movement, they just highlight something that's already been in motion long before you ever heard about this. What actually creates the shift is much simpler and a lot more direct. It's the moment you stop looking outside for a reason to act and start responding to what's already been showing up within you. Nothing changes until you stop waiting for something outside of you to confirm what you already know. That's the part people avoid, because it removes the excuse. If the power isn't in the day, then it has to be in the decision. And decisions require responsibility, even small ones. The truth is, this window doesn't introduce anything new into your life. It doesn't create new problems, new paths, or new opportunities out of nowhere. What it does is bring what's already there into sharper focus. It makes things harder to ignore, easier to recognize, and slightly more accessible to act on. And that's it. It's not forcing you to change. It's not pushing you in a direction. It's simply giving you a clearer moment where you can see what needs your attention, and then leaving the rest up to you. Some people will take that moment seriously. They'll lean into it, even if they don't have everything figured out, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's just one small step in a direction they've been avoiding. Others will acknowledge it briefly, feel it for a second, and then move on. And from the outside, nothing will look different between those two paths at first. But over time, the difference becomes obvious. Your life doesn't change in one moment. It changes because of what you decide to do with that moment. That's what this comes down to. Not the date, not the idea of a portal, not the timing. Just you, recognizing something real when it shows up, and deciding whether you're going to engage with it this time or let it pass, like it always has. And if you're still here, still watching, I truly appreciate it. Remember this, you don't need to rush into anything, and you don't need perfect clarity before you move. Just stay aware of what's been coming up for you and don't ignore it this time. Because sometimes the smallest honest step you take in a moment like this ends up changing more than you expected. Whatever the next few days bring, trust that you're not behind and you're not late. You're exactly at the point where things can start to move if you let them.